As the fortunes of this factory, 14 miles south of Prague. Equipped with the very latest in recording and pressing technology, GZ Media produces over 24 million discs a year, making it the biggest producer of vinyl records in the world. And that's what makes this factory a super factory. The process of cutting a disc starts here.
So we are entering right now a mastering room. This machine is cutting a groove, and that's creating of the master.
Here, music recorded by artists in studios all over the world is loaded into the sound desk. Information from digital audio files is used to cut grooves in what's called the master disc.
It's the grooves of the record that are the important part of generating the sound from the object. Those grooves run around in a giant sort of concentric circle, like a tiny valley all the way around the object. There's lots of bumps and peaks and troughs and what have you in there. As the needle passes through it, that surface texture really causes the needle to vibrate, and that vibration is passed up the arm and is amplified by the electric circuits and then turned into the sound waves at the speaker that we hear. So that's really why you get a very particular acoustic experience from a record. You're hearing the material.
To cut the grooves, the music is sent to a cutting head stylus. The stylus is made from ground diamond, and it cuts a spiral V-shaped sound groove directly into a copper-plated steel disc. For 20 minutes of music, with the disc spinning at 33 1/3 revolution per minute, or RPM, that spiral groove will be 427 meters long. Once the grooves are cut, the GZ team have their master disc. But there's one key process to complete before they can start making records. The technicians need to create a reverse image copy of the master, where all the tiny grooves will be turned into tiny ridges. To do this, an entirely new disc needs to be created by dipping the master into an electroforming bath filled with nickel.
The process is the same as photographic film before most people went digital. The film in your camera would record the negative, which you would then take to the shop, and your snaps or photos that you would take home would be the positive. From that one negative, you could make as many positives or prints as you wanted. The negative was the master, a bit like the copper-plated masters used at GZ, with the grooves cut in. To press lots of records, you need another disc, with the grooves replaced with ridges. It's called the stamper.
The stamper is created by taking the engraved master copper-coated plate and dipping it into an electrolytic bath containing a solution of nickel salts.
That stamper creation takes approximately 1 hour, and it's made of pure nickel.
In the electrolytic bath, the copper master disc acts as a negatively charged cathode, whereas the nickel is a positively charged anode. So over time, in the bath, molecules of the nickel migrate and deposit themselves onto the surface of the copper, and they actually entirely cover the master disc with a thin skin of nickel.
After an hour, the copper disc, now thinly covered with nickel, is removed from the bath. The chemicals are washed off, and now the 2 nickel layers on each side of the copper disc are removed. These 2 sides are then joined to make a new disc. Here the grooves are raised like ridges. The positive disc is called the stamper. It needs to be tough enough to deal with the wear and tear when it's stamped in the pressing machine.
Copper is very soft, but nickel is quite hard material that can sustain the pressure and temperature inside of the press. Any, even tiny imperfection here is audible on the record. So stamper and quality of the stamper is super essential for the quality of the final recordings.
With the stamper ready to press vinyl discs, the original disc is carefully stored with thousands of other masters. The library is full of discs containing the music of the world's leading artists.
We produce vinyl for nearly all stars from music, Rolling Stones, Beatles, Michael Jackson, Queen, U2.
But how did this modest factory on the edge of Prague become the go-to pressing plant for the world's biggest music stars? It's all down to a quirk of history. Today, Prague is the vibrant capital of the Czech Republic. But 30 years ago, things here were very different. This city was stuck behind the Iron Curtain and part of the Soviet bloc. Providing the soundtrack for communist Czechoslovakia was Gramophone Zavody. In its heyday, this state-run plant was pressing millions of records a year. But by the mid-90s, this Cold War relic was facing an economic chill.
Vinyl nearly died. I remember about year 1994-95, we produced only 300,000 vinyl records per year.
In the 80s and the 90s, the music industry in the West went through nothing short of a revolution.
First, there were CDs. Then people started buying their music as internet downloads.
This technological double whammy led to the closure of every single vinyl pressing factory in Europe, bar one, the GZ factory in Czechoslovakia.
It seemed vinyl was as dead as the old Soviet Empire. But at GZ, the record presses kept running. Communist state subsidies propping up the plant had finally run out. The only thing keeping it going was the stubbornness of one man.
I spent here 16 hours every day and slept actually sometime in the office. From that time, I love vinyl records, and vinyl is part of my life. I decided to be the last one who will close the production in Europe.
But then in the mid-2000s, something very curious happened. Slowly but surely, vinyl became popular again. In 2018, vinyl sales rose by almost 15%, the 13th consecutive annual rise. And coping with this huge demand, the one vinyl pressing plant left in Europe. By default, GZ Media became the world's record super factory. And by its very existence, might have actually secured the future of the vinyl disc. Today, the factory is running at full pelt. The stamper that's just been produced is ready to make some discs. First, you need the vinyl, a blend of the widely used plastic compounds polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, and polyvinyl acetate. The raw vinyl compound is pumped up through a series of steam-heated pipes, which liquefies it, and then it's dispatched to the pressing machines.
We are in our pressing area right now, where the real records are manufactured. Each record contains two labels, for side A and side B. So here is the feeder for the labels. So the stampers are fixed into the molds. One stamper for side A, the other one for side B, and all that together creates the vinyl record.
The labels of vinyl are squeezed together for 30 seconds at a pressure of over 100 tons at a temperature of 170 degrees Celsius. Pressing creates the grooves which the record player's stylus will run through to produce the music.
There's something very satisfying about the simplicity, but also the kind of visceral nature of making a vinyl disc. This blob of hot vinyl is extruded out and then stamped with huge amounts of pressure, and then boom, lifted up, and it's a disc. And you go from this blob to the object we would know as a vinyl record in a matter of seconds.
GZ runs a bank of automatic presses running round the clock, producing over 100,000 records a day.
From the press, it will take around 8 to 12 hours to cool down. If we don't cool the record down, there is a high risk of of warping the records. They don't look nice, and secondly, they don't sound nice.
Although GZ has gone through intense modernisation over the last 20 years, some of these record presses date back to the communist era.
We do have here plenty of manual presses. They are less efficient than the automated presses, but it allows you to create a unique records. Multicolor combination, picture discs, different shapes and different colors.
Ideal for artists who want limited and special edition discs. And GZ can make all sorts of colours in all sorts of combinations. And it's a big business. 20% of all the records they make a year are made on the old manual presses imported from East Germany in the 1950s.
What would those old East German communist bosses make of their record presses now being used to churn out vinyls for indie bands?
Whatever press it was made on and whatever the colour, this is where every disc finally ends up. Every year, GZ boxes up 24 million records to send to vinyl fans all around the world. And it's not just music fans who love vinyl.
I have been working in this factory for all my life, and what I love the most is that something physical is at the end of the process, something you can touch, something you can really get familiar with, and you can have a great feeling that other people have a pleasure to touch and feel your product.
With a brilliant blending of retro nostalgia and the very latest musical trends, this company has turned the clock back more than half a century and emerged ahead of the game. To those who thought records died with the 20th century, this vinyl super factory shows that yes, what goes around comes around. Coming up, the Californian candy super factory pumping out 50 million jelly beans